hours. So we've gone from birth to 12 hours. Now we're doing 12 to 24. And this is the time that by now your baby should have had their first feed. It might not have been in the first hour, but you've definitely had a chance for your baby to feed by now, and ideally has fed 2 to 3 times. What you can expect is another 2 to 3 feeds in the next 12 hours. But once again, still honoring that birth process and still making sure that if baby isn't feeding as you'd like, that skin to skin is the best place to be, and that can be either you or your partner. The other things we're going to be chatting about now is trusting that it's enough, which is a very difficult thing to do. We've already talked about the colostrum and the way that the colostrum is designed to be in small amounts, the fact that your baby's tummy is incredibly small, and the fact that most of their energy requirements are being met by them breaking down their own subcutaneous brown fat. The most important thing to do with the next 2 to 3 feeds is feel the latch as much as watching it, because you want to get used to what a good latch feels like, making sure that it is not painful at all. It might be uncomfortable, especially if you've got a baby who has been feeding well, very vigorously. The first feed was particularly long. And even with a good latch, you've never actually had anyone or anything suckling on your breast for an extended period of time so frequently, so they may feel quite tender. But there's a difference between it being tender and really, really painful. So just making sure that you know the difference and getting a good latch if there is any pain. The other thing to be mindful of is that if you do have a particularly sleepy baby, although it's okay because they are still recovering from the birth, you want to gently wake them around the 3-hour mark. And the best way to do that is by taking them, placing them on the bed in front of you, taking all the swaddles off, taking their clothes off, changing their nappy, and allowing them to have some, the fact as soon as you take their clothes off will generally wake them up, because there's a sudden change in temperature. They're very sensory, they're very aware, so the cool air on their bodies will wake them up, and that will be usually enough to then encourage a little bit of a feed, and feed them naked, because if they're naked, skin to skin, then that will help to keep them awake and to encourage them to feed. If it's only a short 5-minute feed, but it was a good drawing, good nutritive deep sucking, and baby falls asleep, trust that that was enough, which is going to be very, very difficult. And I totally get that. But that's where the hands-on support, or having the resource support group like we've got in our WhatsApp community, will really guide you with that, so that we can look at all of the factors and just reassure you that it's okay. The baby may, you don't know what's going to happen in the next hour or two. So it might suckle just quickly for 5 minutes and fall asleep at the breast. You're really worried. You're wondering if baby should be having any more. You try and wake them. They're just not having any of it. Keeping them skin to skin, because they may wake up again another hour, and then the next feed might be a little bit more vigorous, a little bit longer. And while it's important to be mindful of how long a feed is, I would prefer it if you really just trusted the quality of the feed. How does it feel? And rather than counting each feed how long it lasts, to see and break up every day into 24-hour periods, so that each 24 hours you're counting how many times in 24 hours the baby feeds. Because in the first weeks, there is no rhythm. So specifically in the first 12 hours, we would like the baby to feed at least 2 to 3 times in the first 12 hours after birth. It's only 2, that's okay, because the next 12 hours might be the 2 to 3, and the next 12 hours will improve, and as it goes, it's going to change. So trusting that process. There isn't anything more than I can say beyond that, and that's something that you're going to have to work at on your own, to see what it is that you need to do to dig deeper and find the resources and information and the support that you need to be able to trust this process of breastfeeding the way that you have been hopefully able to trust your process of pregnancy and birthing your baby. One of the ways that you will know that your baby is getting enough as you move forward will be by looking at the amount of wee and poo. If it's going in, it must be coming out. But here's the thing. In the first days, not much is going in, so we don't expect much to come out. And in the first few days, wee and poo will be quite different. So in the first 24 hours, I don't expect anything more than that large, sticky black meconium poo and lots of smudges after that, and probably only 1 or 2 wee in 24 hours. That's a little bit, but not much has gone in yet. And very often babies who are very often babies will pass urine quite while they're being born or soon after birth. Sometimes we even miss it, but either 1 or 2 wees in the first 24 hours would be absolutely normal, perfect, and okay. If you're using disposable nappies, they're designed to be incredibly absorbent, and because that wee is so small, you might miss it. If you're particularly worried and you really want to know, then a little hint from me is to just put a cotton wool ball, if it's a boy, over their little willy. If it's a girl, just where the wee is going to be coming out, because when that ball is soaked or wet, then you know that the baby's had a wee. You don't have to do that. It's just a little thing that you might want to do if you're particularly worried. In the next 24 hours, as the days go on, so obviously 24 to 48, we're now looking into day 2. So we can expect 2 to 3 wees, and meconium is starting to transition, but it just goes more brownish. Still not a big poo, still more smudges. As we get to day 3, we can expect 3 wees or more. And that's the day that generally we expect your milk to come in. So the brownish poo starts changing now to more yellow breast milk poo. Still in small amounts and probably not much at all. Day 4 is when things still really start picking up. Definitely you're going to have 4 or more wees, and by then you will definitely start seeing more yellow, watery, grainy poo. It looks like it's got mustard seeds in it, and that it means that's a reassurance to you that 1, your colostrum is transitioning into breast milk, and 2, that there's enough to make a breast milk poo. Thereafter, you can expect the output to increase exponentially, because now your milk is really coming in, baby's feeding more frequently, more hungrily, and it will literally be a matter of in one end and out the other. And that in itself is not a bad thing. Like, you might think, oh my goodness, what is actually going on? But it's just a really healthy sign that all is going well. So in one end, out the other is okay, even if it gets to the point where it's quite explosive and watery. Not diarrhea, not anything wrong, just part of the normal feeding and input output. It's a wonderful reassurance that everything is okay with your baby, but knowing what to expect is incredibly important because it's so changeable, specifically in those first 5 days. Now let's look at another way of knowing your baby is getting enough and knowing how to respond to your baby. You may be thinking, or you've read books and whatever, and you want to get your baby onto a 3-hourly routine schedule as soon as possible. There are varying thought patterns around this. The one that I follow and that I believe in is by following and responding to your baby's cues, and in doing so, your baby will naturally fall into a 3-hourly routine, but it probably won't do it before 6 weeks. But by doing this, you're getting to know your baby and you're responding specifically to their needs, rather than you trying to fit them into a schedule that they're not quite ready for physiologically, and that doesn't necessarily meet their needs to be held, comforted, and reassured that their world has changed and they're now outside. So responding to their cues, specifically sleep cues and hungry cues, is the most important thing in the first week after birth. There's not many play cues because they sleep most of the time in the first 2 weeks. After that, you will start seeing play cues, and those are literally eyes wide awake, eyes wide open, happy, alert, looking around, engaging, getting eye contact. But you don't get much of that in those first weeks, specifically the first week. It's more the hungry cues, and your hungry cues are all around the mouth. So being guided by their cheeks and towards anything that they can suckle on. And if you're holding your baby up here, they will naturally start wanting to suckle over here and on your nose. If your husband or partner is holding, they will move towards anything, the ear. So they are wired to root and suckle. They will also make little noises when they wake up. So little noises letting you know I'm awake and I'm ready to feed. Look, listen, and watch. Look, listen and watch what your baby is doing. As much as you want to respond, you also want to learn. So rather than flying over and picking them up immediately, you hear a little squeak or a movement, watch, because babies do lots of movements. They yawn, they stretch, they burp, they fart, they hiccup, they sneeze, and they sneeze because they can't sniff, not because they have a cold. Hiccups, you had them throughout pregnancy, they will continue to have them in the first weeks, and it's okay if their body is soft and relaxed while they're hiccuping, especially after feed. Don't need to do anything. You don't need to stop the hiccups. In fact, that rhythmic hiccuping is something that will help them to go to sleep. So looking at their cues, their hungry cues, and also, as soon as you see a cue, go retrospectively. What happened half an hour ago, 1 hour ago, an hour and a half ago? Am I expecting my baby to be waking up and ready to feed? Or have they just fed? Is this, what day am I at? All of those things. So, just watch, look, listen, learn. And little head bobbing, if they are skin to skin, the one cue that will really let you know is if they are bobbing and pecking at your chest. Sleepy cues, on the other hand, are typical sleepy cues. So droopy eyes, drowsy, dropping off to sleep. If they are breastfeeding, the suck will slow down. When they're sucking at the breast, it's natural for them to have pauses. Nobody ever picks something up and just drinks and drinks and drinks and drinks until it's finished. I'll sip, I'll put it down, and I'll take breaks, and so does your baby. So what happens when they get sleepy is that those breaks get longer and longer and longer and don't necessarily respond to a little bit of stimulation or reminding them to keep sucking. However, when those pauses get long enough and there's no stimulation, they will sort of fall off the breast, and that's a sleepy cue. Body is soft and relaxed. If they're not on the breast and there's a sleepy cue, respond by either putting them down if you are ready to do that and you would like them to be put down to sleep, or just settling them on your chest for them to sleep on the chest. But as a sort of little tip for going forward, when you're wanting to learn how to put your baby down, it's about responding to sleepy cues so that you can put them down and allow them to fall asleep in the place where they're going to fall asleep, and being able to respond to those. In the first weeks, sleepy and hungry are quite interchangeable and happen quite a lot. So go back to trusting yourself that it's a learning for both of you, and you can't really get it wrong. Okay. In fact, you will get it wrong a few times, but you'll eventually get it right. So it's okay to get it wrong. Expect to get it wrong. It's trial and error, and it's part of your transition and learning each other. You're both learning. Your baby's learning how to share with you what they need, and you're learning how to respond to that. And given time and practice, you will know what your baby's saying and you will respond accordingly. But if you never look, listen, watch, and learn, then you're constantly going to be at odds with each other, and that's going to make it really difficult and more challenging than what it really, really should be. The last thing I want to chat about in this video is supplement feeds. Now, supplement feeds are very common in hospitals, unfortunately, and the only thing that I can think about is that possibly it is a misunderstanding of the importance of the first few days of breastfeeding and of the delicate balance between mom and baby, and the importance of colostrum and bonding and skin to skin, and the uncertainty, trusting the uncertainty of those first few days. And very often when you're incredibly uncertain, the staff will step in by helping you, fixing it, and saying, well, if you're really uncertain and you're really worried, we'll just give the baby a little top up. But unfortunately, often those top ups are not little. They are 30 to 45 mils, which is way more than your baby needs. And so there's a few things that happen when your baby gets a large top up. One, it's too much for the baby, so it's quite difficult for them to digest. It will give you a false sense of security because your baby will go into quite a deep sleep because they are really working hard to digest that feed. And you will naturally think that this is the way the baby is meant to be responding. And why doesn't my baby sleep like that when I give a feed? And it's not meant to. Your baby is getting colostrum, and because it's in small amounts and highly concentrated, but exactly what your baby needs, it means that your baby will be waking more frequently for those feeds. So understanding the different ways that your baby will respond to that supplemental feed, and that the amount is very important. The second thing, of course, is that it does mess with the delicate balance of your breastfeeding relationship, because if it is given a large amount, and it usually is more than what baby needs, but even if it isn't, it's still harder to digest. That means that baby may not feed when they would normally have fed. So you're missing out on one of the demands that indicate to your body that your baby is born and how much does your baby need. So it's all about supply and demand. And the more your baby demands, the more your body is going to supply. So it's impacting that delicate balance between you and your baby. And then unfortunately, it does also impact their gut, because it doesn't have the same properties as colostrum. It doesn't work in the same way. It doesn't have all those natural immunoglobulins and antibodies and everything. So it can impact the benefit that you've given your baby with that first feed colostrum. And if it is the first feed, then it's not doing what the colostrum would have done, which is once again, like I say, important for your baby's long-term health, and something that you really want to be mindful of. So making sure that the staff are aware that you would like to avoid supplemental feeds at all costs. And it has to be done in conjunction with you and for a very, very good reason. Now, some of those, and the one that's used very, very often, of course, is a low blood sugar. And low blood sugars do happen. I'm not saying that they don't happen, but a low blood sugar can easily be resolved by putting the baby on the breast, and if they're particularly sleepy and unable to feed, by expressing a small amount of colostrum and giving it to the baby with a syringe or a cup, so that even 2 to 3 mils would be enough to bring the blood sugar up. If you are diabetic, there's a good chance that you've had quite a large baby, and the baby is also sometimes in the beginning difficult for them to maintain their blood sugar. So that might be an indication, but once again, it could be resolved with colostrum before a supplemental feed. And that would be a time, if your baby is over 4 kilos, that they would be checking the blood sugar. And another time they would be checking baby's blood sugar is a smaller baby. So a baby under 2.8 kilos. And same thing. Usually, and very often, and most of the time, that blood sugar, if it's low, can be resolved with some colostrum. Now, it does mean them pricking your baby's foot, which is not nice, and it's not something that you want them to do. But the benefit of checking the blood sugar again after a colostrum feed far outweighs the disadvantage of giving a supplemental feed rather and instead of that. And then the other time a supplemental feed is very often given is when you have a cesarean section, and in the time that you are still in the operating room before you come back, baby might be quite alert, awake, crying, and some nurse who thinks she's doing a really good thing by giving the baby a feed, it's not the right thing to do. The best thing to do in that case is for your partner to be doing skin to skin until you come back, and then you will be doing skin to skin, and then making sure that you have somebody who can guide and assist and help you with the first feed, because if you've had a cesarean section, then positioning is a little bit more difficult, especially if you had an epidural, because for the first 12 hours after an epidural, they want you to be more or less flat and don't want you to raise your head much more than that. But it's possible to breastfeed in that position with the right help and guidance and assistance. And that's it for the first 24 hours of breastfeeding and establishing breastfeeding with your baby. The take home from this one is the importance of learning what your baby's sleepy and feed cues are and how to respond to them, and bearing in mind that it is trial and error and you will get it right the more you listen, watch, and learn. The second thing is being guided by their output, and that's going to follow through for the next couple of days. The third thing is being really mindful of supplemental feeds and when and why those are done, and making sure that it isn't done without your permission and without first giving you the opportunity to give some colostrum. And the fourth thing was the skin to skin, which kind of goes there with all of that. And I will see you in the next video.